rock and roll, sir.
Well, Kirsten is all yours for the next 20 minutes. Hard out at 19.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
Hi, I am good. How are you doing?
Well, I bet you have been busy for the past, almost week now?
Well, to be completely honest, I actually don't cover banking anymore. I actually cover tech companies like Facebook and Google. So I'm actually just reliving my experience covering the financial crisis more than anything.
Well, even with covering Facebook and Google, I mean, look at what's been going on in the tech world over the past 6 months.
I know. 100%. Yes.
Wow.
It's been crazy for sure.
When you relive it the way that you did, because you put your book together, The Lost Bank, when you're seeing this all over again, I mean, do you feel like that you the sky is falling, the sky is falling?
It's funny. I don't feel like the sky is falling, but I also am just so surprised that everything we learned back then, we clearly forgot in the ensuing decade and a half. It's just people asking me about what are FDIC insurance limits. It's just that's really bringing it all back.
Well, it shocks me that, with the bank in Silicon Valley, that, the people that had over $250,000 are going, they didn't know that they were only guaranteed the $250,000?
That's really surprising to me. But on the other hand, no one during the financial crisis knew either. And it was only when they went on this sort of campaign to let people know that finally everyone understood what that was. And back then, actually, the insurance limit was only like 100,000. They increased it.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that bank right there in Silicon Valley really kind of affects your world as well, with you working with tech companies, because that right there is the heart and soul of tech.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where everyone here, from startups to tech companies to venture capitalists, they all were banking there. It's like the local bank here.
So I guess where I'm lost is because I think our government is lost too. So therefore it just trickles down to regular people like myself, because we're trying to hit every single angle here. And over the weekend, I just kept reading those headlines, and I almost feel like my financial advisory says, don't read the paper.
And there again reminds me so much of the financial crisis, because that's what everyone was advising then too. The headlines are definitely scary for sure. And we were actually just talking about Credit Suisse and, to use kind of a politically charged word, the bailout they got over the weekend from the Swiss government. That in particular is one of concern, because it's much, much bigger than a bank like Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah. In talking with real people, as well as, reading the papers, the one thing that people keep asking is, why is it that these CEOs or the decision makers, why aren't they paying the price? Are we in that same kind of a situation again?
I think that it seems definitely from the outset like we are. I can see why people think that. Now, I think that there is a movement to change that again. You saw Biden pushing for stricter laws against bankers. It does seem every time that this happens, it's sort of like, where are the CEOs, right? And I think everyone is sort of hopeful that this time around they're going to figure out, first of all, investigate, of course, and then figure out what happened and how the people responsible can really, pay the price this time, for sure.
But you know what my fear is, Kirsten, is that I fear that they invested their money in cryptocurrency. That I keep waiting for someone to step out saying, all right, so the bank messed up. They went with crypto. I mean, NFL players and NBA players are doing it. Oh, what the heck?
I know. I don't know too much about that, but crypto, was interwoven in all of this just because so many of the banks had crypto customers at this point, some of them. And that's obviously a very unstable corner of the financial markets for sure.
Wow. It's one of the things that scares me the most out of all of this, and I think it's because I really try to be with the everyday person, is that everybody is doing their banking on their stupid smartphone. I mean, it's like before they make a purchase, they go to this so-called website so they can transfer so much money. I'm so afraid those are the banks that are going to get hit the worst.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, even the largest banks like Wells Fargo or Bank of America, they have everything on the app. Mm-hmm. I am still kind of old school. I will go to the ATM sometimes.
That's me.
but like, here's the funny thing not very funny, but during the bank run of Silicon Valley Bank, it actually was not easy to see because so much was happening on the app. During the financial crisis, you saw much more people actually physically going to banks and lining up, and you kind of saw the panic in a way that you didn't this time because it was on an app.
Wow. So what are the rumors about the employees getting a hefty little paycheck before everything fell apart?
I don't know too much about that, to be honest, but in all of these situations, that is all going to be investigated. And what Biden was pushing for was clawbacks, right, of pay to some executives if it is found that they were responsible for this. And for example, with Silicon Valley Bank, it's a little bit hard to see how leadership wouldn't have seen some of this coming with interest rates rising. That was their main issue. They, were in this environment where they were getting just tons of cash all the time from their customers. And then suddenly that reversed. Well, it wasn't just out of nowhere, right? The Fed was signaling they were going to raise rates for a while. So that sort of thing, I'm sure, is what banking regulators are going to be looking at.
So the actions of JPMorgan and Wells Fargo helping out the bank in San Francisco this past Friday, that to me was a reminder of how teamwork works, because back in 2008, when the banks came together, I had never seen anything like that before. So I wasn't shocked to see, JPMorgan as well as Wells Fargo team up.
That's right. So that, again, was just eerily similar to the financial crisis. Now, the reason they have to do that is not because they want to necessarily save one particular bank, although in this case, yes, that was the outcome. It's just that they know from the financial crisis that once this contagion hits, it's almost like a laser that's going to land on the next weakest bank. Yep. And they have to control it, right? Because if they don't, that's when you get this cascading effect of fear where customers are just looking at any bank and starting to pull money. And that's what they're trying to really stop there.
What did you learn in creating the Lost Bank in the way where the person that goes to the ATM window is affected by that? Where does the fear begin? Inside the bank or outside in the car? During the financial crisis, and we actually wrote a story about this at the Wall Street Journal, it was a lot different where the fear started because we really didn't have social media back then. I mean, there was Facebook, there was Twitter, but no one was really using them the way we use them now. And I just was so struck by this time around how you could get on Twitter and there were really big name investors and then just kind of random people just shouting, get your money out of the bank, or like, the financial institution is collapsing, or just these really like fear-mongering headlines that you really didn't have that as much at the time. It was much more tightly controlled, the message. And so I think back in 2008, it was much more sort of word of mouth or what you were reading literally in the newspaper or seeing on CNN. I sit here and listen to these stories and I think of the people in the Federal Reserve going, oh, my God, how much more can we take? I mean, because they are just getting the hell beat out of them.
Oh, my God. Well, this is not the week to be a banking regulator. That's for sure. I mean, banks have been boring for so long. I mean, it's just all our banking reporters, even at the Wall Street Journal, we have this amazing, massive team of them. Most of them never gone through this because it's been cycled out since 2008. And, I think there's probably a lot of new banking regulators, too, that have never gone through this. So it's really interesting.
My heart goes out to the employees of the banks, all the way down to the person sitting at the ATM window. And I also have a big heart for how this is going to affect the world of housing, because there are some innocent people that made a choice to become realtors, and now their world could be shaken.
Absolutely. I always feel the worst for the little guy in this. And obviously, realtors are right in there. I always remember the story that someone told me when I was reporting Washington Mutual's failure, which is during one of the big bank runs when everyone was panicking, this bank customer took a cake to her teller at the Washington Mutual branch. And it just sort of showed how everyone kind of also was worried about those lower level employees who had nothing to do with this, or, you know, the businesses that rely on this ecosystem that also, in this case, really had nothing to do with it.
Well, yeah, because look at the bank in Silicon Valley in the way that so many startup companies were getting money from that bank.
It's interesting because startups are such a strange business. It took me a little while to wrap my head around this when I moved to the area, but they often are not posting profits in a way that a normal business would right away. And so there's inherently more risk in taking on that kind of banking customer, right? And so really, regulators should have been looking much more closely at Silicon Valley Bank. You know, much earlier, most of their deposits were uninsured, which when I read that figure, I was sort of like, what? I mean, after the financial crisis, I didn't even think that was possible to have an institution like that. So it's definitely a tricky situation.
It's almost like somebody fell asleep. Was it the regulator or was it the banker? Who fell asleep on this one?
It could have been both, to be honest. I don't know. I mean, it's gonna come out in the ensuing weeks, but you can see how we were all lulled into this sense of, oh, we just went through this giant financial crisis, and then the ensuing years were, like I said before, honestly boring. Nothing was happening. You know, we were in this period of insane growth in Silicon Valley. You see how this is tied to all the big tech companies hiring. They're putting tons of money at Silicon Valley Bank and other banks. And so it was just this boom period.
I wish the average person knew how much of that behind the scenes money transferring actually took place. I think that if we understood the banking industry as a business and not just a place to plant our money, I swear we would all grow stronger as a community.
I completely agree. It's a very confusing thing to wrap your head around. I mean, as someone who spent like many, months and years researching the banking system, and I feel like, I don't have any sort of special degree for that. It's confusing, and it's very confusing. And when you start getting these headlines and you don't understand the system, then it's just downright scary because you're seeing these headlines and you're like, what is going to happen? Is my money safe? Like, is my bank next? That sort of thing. And that's the kind of fearful thinking that just starts taking place during a time like this.
Yeah. How many people have you talked to that said that they want to put the money underneath the mattress? And I'm looking at them going, do not do that. There's so many home break-ins now. People know that if you're moving your money.
Oh my gosh, I know. I would just never do that. Yeah. It's funny because you saw this, only 2 years ago during the pandemic, when the pandemic first started and the stock market was dropping and everyone wanted to pull their money out. And it's just, you have to trust the system at a time like this, but it's, again, very hard to do if you don't really understand the system.
That's, you sound just like my financial advisor because, when this thing started happening, I mean, and all the way back to 2008, I have loved this guy from the very beginning. And when he would say that, you've got to trust it. You've got to trust it. If you have questions, I'll help you find answers, but do not react right now. Do not.
It's reacting just becomes this cascading effect that makes the entire situation worse. Yeah. And it's hard to see that, but truly regulators are not going to let a situation happen like the financial crisis if they can avoid it, right? Of course, I'm not saying something like that could never happen, but the system is set up for us all to be protected. And let's be honest, like there are not that many normal people that have to worry about a $250,000 FDIC insurance limit, right? We're talking about, that was really a problem for business customers and other, high net worth individuals. So if you have less than 250K in the bank, you have nothing to worry about.
I feel for the state of California. I mean, it seems like if it's not the fires, it's the wind. Now it's the banking. It's like, oh my God, everything seems to be pushing people out of California.
I know. I was just watching over the weekend that movie from a little while ago with John Cusack, 2012, where California just like sinks into the ocean. And I'm just like, if this is a metaphor or what, I don't know what is, but it's been rough out here with all the tech layoffs, so many of them. And now Silicon Valley Bank, it's been rough for sure.
I know that you're really busy with the tech world, but here's the thing. Don't you think that the Lost Bank is screaming for a follow-up? Because, right, you're in the beginning pages of that second book.
I completely think so. I just honestly can't believe this is happening again, especially the bank run part of it. I sort of thought we're never going to see that again. They've taken care of it. They've raised the deposit insurance limit. People are informed now, but apparently that's not the case. So it's pretty shocking.
Do you think we should be in fear? Because you know what happened to the housing industry back in 2008 where everything just basically stopped. I mean, Charlotte is a growing city. There's building all over the place. I don't want to walk through a ghost town.
It's easy for me to say because, again, I'm a pretty well-researched person just because of my profession, but I just think this is not the time to be fearful.
Right.
I think, of course, growth is going to slow. We're in a slow down growth mode just everywhere, but there's cycles like that, right? And so it's just a matter of kind of waiting through that cycle. I just don't really believe in buying into that fear mentality.
But you're going to think I'm a freak here, Kirsten, in the way that when it comes to bad news, because we're all glued to it, I would rather think about what's going on with the banking industry right now than to think about the gentleman that's in North Korea that's preparing his army for a nuclear war, or what's going on in Russia today with the leader of China and Russia getting together. I would rather fear my financial world here than have to deal with those.
Well, it's easier to wrap, your head around in a way, that's for sure. And it's I don't want to say smaller problem, but maybe. So I think you might have to ask your therapist about that one, though.
I want to go back a couple years when the only thing we were worried about was that little helicopter up there on Mars. Was it going to work or not? And we were all going, oh, my God, here we go.
Right. It's just interesting how these cycles go. And remember, it was only 3 years ago that we thought, that it was the start of the pandemic. And now here we are worrying about the financial system. So again, these things are just cyclical.
Now, because we have experienced so much in the past 20 years, being a journalist and being real with your words, do you think that we have the qualifications of being the second greatest generation?
I think we do. That's a really good question. I feel like we've handled these situations pretty well, but that's a good, I feel like we brought a lot to the table.
Absolutely. So where can people go to find out more about you? Because, we cannot lose our interest in what's going on in the tech world because it's happening. I mean, even Facebook is coming under attack again. Didn't they just fire a bunch of people?
I don't mean to talk my own book here literally, but like the Washington Mutual story from the financial crisis is so eerily similar to what is happening now in a way that if you kind of want to see what happened back then with the largest bank failure in U.S. history and how regulators reacted in all of this, I definitely recommend reading The Lost Bank. And again, sorry for the shameless plug.
No,
but
I want you to.
Truly, it is so similar. It's scary. And then, I just always recommend to people, keep up with the news, but don't don't be glued to it because we're in a cycle where the headlines are definitely going to be scary for sure. Yeah. And it's just important to parse through that.
I want listeners to get the book. I want them to read the book, but I also want them to have a yellow highlighter in their hand so they can compare the notes and so they can go back to it when something like this happens again in 12 to 15 years.
Yeah, and I really can't believe it's happening again this way. It's really surprising.
You got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me.
Will you be brilliant today, okay?
Okay, I will. You too.